Alright everybody, welcome to Insomnia Live. Tonight we're going to be talking about traditional publishing versus self-publishing. It's a topic I've covered a few times, but I think having the slides is going to be useful for folks to kind of process the information because there's a lot of it. We have a lot of discussions and such to be had about this entire topic. So let's start digging into this. So as most people can imagine, I do have opinions on this, and while I do work in the traditional publishing industry, it might surprise some people. I'm not biased against self-publishing. I think it's the best route for some authors. But both types of publishing have equal potential for authors. So it's a matter of which is going to work best for you. And that's kind of the discussion we're here to have today, is to help you decide what's going to actually work best for you. As I've said before, authors in the modern market have a much wider range of options than they've ever had before. And kind of underlining the point that there's no one way to success. You can find success in multiple different methods of getting your work out there. So with the way the modern market is, authors have unprecedented access to so many different options that they've never had before. So we can be excited about that without forgetting that traditional publishing really does have a role in today's world. No matter what certain blogs or people will tell you, it's an important part of the marketing world today. Publishing, generally speaking, has changed a lot in the last few years, particularly since the advent of Amazon's Create Space and Amazon in general. There are many services directed towards people who are looking to self-publish that they've never had access to before, and with the advent of doing not offset print runs, individual printing and shipping books, authors can now, instead of having to do an offset print run for thousands and thousands of dollars, they can print small amounts of money and ship their books to people through some of the distributors that serve larger clients without having to pay the overhead. So it's given them the access to greater publishing avenues and distribution avenues that they've never previously had in their lives. So let's take a look at the modern author and see some of the traits that exist today. Modern authors have, as I said, unprecedented access to their audiences through social media, blogs, websites, other channels, blogs, websites, and other channels to reach people in ways they've never been able to before. My husband just informed me that I said can print small amounts of money. I mean small amounts of books. Sorry about that. I'm having a little bit of brain fog today, apparently. But you can market in ways you were never able to in the past. And that's a really exciting thing. And authors are... I can't encourage you enough to utilize all these channels, because without them you're not going to be a success no matter what direction you choose to go. Previously, authors did not have a choice to self-publish if they wanted their books to reach customers, if they wanted to have good distribution. Today, they now have access to printers and such that previously only publishers had access to. I watched my father try and self-publish a book and try and get it to publishers when I was younger, and he struggled really hard and eventually settled on self-publishing, but unfortunately for him, self-publishing for him meant having the book printed at Staples and then assembling it in 3-ring binders, because he didn't have access or knowledge about how to use a printer or a distributor properly. Modern authors also have way more competition than they ever have in their lives, that are in the past, which means, as I've talked about, you're going to have to do a lot more and be right on that cutting edge in order to reach people in ways that you never had to before. Amazon has literally thousands of books published every single day, more than has been done in the history of literature, which is both an exciting time and kind of a frustrating one for authors, because having your book stand out, being able to be more than just a drop in the bucket, is a really difficult thing, and it's a really hard task both for indie authors and for modern traditional publishers. So it's extremely difficult for everybody to get themselves seen because there are so many people. And also, with the vanishing of gatekeepers, you have things hitting the market that you have people writing books like during NaNoWriMo and immediately uploading them to Amazon with some slapdash cover art, and there's a lot of them. So the people that you're hoping are going to buy your books have been exposed firsthand to the slush pile, which is what traditional publishers call their submission inbox. And so with that in mind, you need to fight a lot harder to be seen, whereas previously, if you sent a book to a publisher, they didn't have to do quite as much marketing or as aggressive marketing. You could kind of do if you build it, they will come sort of thing with books, whereas today it's a lot different, so you have to differentiate yourself from the crowd. So it's both a really exciting time and a really difficult and stressful time for the modern author. So we're watching the entire world of writing get kind of turned on its head as everybody tries to figure out how to best use the internet to their advantage. And it's a challenge that all of us have to figure out, regardless of what direction you choose to go, but it does bear discussing. I apparently forgot to animate all of the other slides, so you're just going to have all the information at once. So we'll just go through it a piece at a time. So let's start with discussing whether or not your book is ready to be published. So when you're deciding on how to publish your book, before making that decision, you need to know whether or not your book is ready. And what ready looks like is different for self-publishers or traditional publishers, because if you're looking for a traditional publishing company, ready means you may still need some editing, you haven't got the cover design and everything done, but ready to be published for a self-publishing author means you have to be completely ready to upload your book to Amazon. So they do look a little bit different, but there are a few things that say you're ready to start the publishing process. So have you done as much self-editing as you can? That means you've gone through your book more than once and looked at everything you've written and really studied it and see if all of your P's and Q's are the right direction. Are all your quotation marks facing the right way? Have you really made everything clear? Have you edited your book the best you possibly can? From there, have you sent your book to beta readers? And I don't mean asking your husband or your friends or your family to read your book, because they don't count as beta readers. Unless for some reason your husband or your family member is in the writing or editing profession, in which case they can count. But you have to recognize that most people, hey, if you want to have your friend read your book for you, they may not give you an honest opinion, because they don't want to hurt your feelings and they want to still be your friend when they're done reading it. So you've got to have somebody who's a little bit less biased to give you opinions, and you should have multiple, because one person's opinion doesn't necessarily represent how everybody's going to feel about it. So just because one person didn't like it or did like it for whatever reason doesn't mean that everybody's going to have that feeling. So you've got that to think about. And finally, you have to have set your book aside for a little while and come back to read it later. If you're still satisfied after doing that, and that doesn't mean you don't have little tiny nitpicks, because let's be honest, writers could sit around and nitpick their books forever and still not be satisfied. But if you set it aside for a while and gone back to it with some fresh eyes and looked at it and said, yeah, alright, this is still good, then you might be ready to start looking into publishing your book. And what looking into publishing your book means for self-publishers and folks looking to publish traditionally is a little bit different. So don't, so let's kind of get into what that means before going too much further. Looking at the differences between self-publishing and traditional publishing. So let's go down the line here. When you're looking at who has control over the book production process, self-published authors have complete control over everything and make all the decisions for better or for worse. And I'm going to explain what that means to you in a second here. In traditional publishing, an author doesn't really have control over what their book's production looks like, which is normal, but their production is done by professionals whose job it is to know what is best. So that's a benefit, but some people really want to have control. So what I mean by for better or for worse is many authors don't really know what is going to work or what the best choice for their book is. They might think that this particular cover artist who a professional would look at and goes, oh no, but they might not realize that that cover artist, quote unquote, is actually delivering them a steaming pile of horse poo. It's not really something they want to trust, or they might not know that this so-called editor didn't really do the job they were paid for, and that is something that happens. So you have to kind of balance what you want with what's best for the book. And sometimes also I've had authors who have these ideas for covers that are just not possible and wouldn't look good. And as an author who's self-publishing their book, you can have whatever you want on the cover, and that sometimes isn't a good thing. So having that complete control can be a wonderful thing if the author knows what they're doing. If they don't know what they're doing with it, it can prove to be absolutely disastrous. Second, obviously, if you're self-publishing your book, authors receive 100% of the profits. Conversely, with traditional publishing, authors receive about a 14% royalty per book, depending on whether it is off list or off net. If it is off list, 14% of the sale price is actually a substantial cut of the profits. I get into a little bit of the crunchy number stuff later on in this discussion, but I can tell you 14%, give or take, which is roughly the industry average for print books. For ebooks, it's often 40 to 50% of the list price. But we'll discuss what that number means, but it isn't as meager as it sounds. I know 14% versus 100% sounds really sad and kind of pathetic, but if you're looking at profits here, it's not as diminutive as you'd believe. And finally, at the bottom, this is the chunk that really limits people. I will answer your question in just a second, Founder. What really limits people here is finally the overhead. So authors are responsible for complete costs of producing their book, and they have to find professionals and hire them for things they can't do alone if they're self-publishing. And publishing a book properly is extremely expensive. It shouldn't be something you do spending 5 minutes over a weekend. It's very pricey to do properly, and in order to really compete, you should do it properly. Now, there are ways you can cut costs, there are ways you can get around paying certain things, but you should be cautious with spending a very light amount of money on this, because in book publishing, a lot of the time you get what you pay for, and I can't stress that enough. On the other side, traditional publishing, the publisher pays 100% of the overhead costs for producing their book and uses a team of professionals that they have hired because they know what they're doing and they've vetted these people, and you're working with a team who's experienced in this particular arena and who is ostensibly trustworthy. Now, of course, there are lemons out there. There are publishers who don't do a good job. There are publishers whose editors and so on are shysters. There are a lot of bad eggs out there, just as there are bad eggs for editing and cover design and all kinds of things in general. So This is assuming that the company you're working with is a legitimate company and isn't a fly-by-night operation or is out to uh, damage your IP. Founder mentioned here in the chat that a lot of people are worried about losing their rights or creative control over their intellectual property. So when you're talking rights in publishing, usually it's things like first serial rights, which means who gets to print it first, or movie rights, or rights for audiobooks or merchandise. There are a whole bunch of things. They're called subsidiary rights. That's the clause in your contract you want to be looking for if you're discussing rights. And creative control over their intellectual property. A publisher doesn't typically want to force you to write in a certain direction. Our authors have complete creative control over their stories. If, for example, John Caligari, the author of Cocytus and Red Fist of Rome, if he was to make a decision for his story, unless one of the editors had a really valid reason for saying, I don't think so, we're not going to publish this, we aren't going to take control of your work, because publishers aren't really interested in writing your novel for you. Our editors have a lot of work to do, and we're not looking to steal your ideas or anything like that, because it's so much work. As you as an author know, writing a novel is really hard work. And as cold as this might sound, there are no ideas revolutionary enough or new enough or what have you that haven't been done before. There aren't really too many literary ideas that haven't done before. Sure, there might be new plots, new characters, new worlds you've created, but they're all going to be based on the human experience, which is pretty universal. So while there are new ideas and concepts, there aren't too many ideas that out there that work that are going to be that radical that somebody's going to want to steal it and run away with it. The idea of, for example, Harry Potter, it's a coming of age story, so we'll start with that. While the setting of Hogwarts specifically is unique, there are hundreds of thousands of different book series where a special child is sent to a special school to learn their special skills. You see where I'm going with this. Harry Potter's wonderful and it's one of my favorite book series, but it isn't so vastly unique that someone couldn't come up with an idea similar to that on their own. And like I said, most of us, I know I have my own book that I'm writing. I don't want to steal your ideas. And Founder, I'm not sure that accepting that challenge is going to be healthy. We'll talk after the stream. So that's just a quick overview of the two major differences between self-publishing and traditional publishing. So let's get into the details here. When you're looking at the math, for Insomnia, our authors receive a 14% royalty on the list price. That means the book that sells for $15 nets about $2.10 royalty for authors, because we're taking 14% of $15 and that goes to our authors. This is for print books, not for ebooks, which are priced differently, but we're just going to go with the $15 because it's a nice round number. After the amount of money we spend, after processing fees, Amazon takes about 40% of the sales price, and I know our distributor takes a chunk and so on. We get about $3.90 out of that $15 per book. $2.10 of that goes to the authors. I'm sorry, we get about $5 or so. And so we make a little over, almost $1.50 more than the author does. And most of that money goes right back into paying for things with the book production. And at how much it costs us to produce a book, we have to sell a lot of copies to break even on production costs. Penner asks how taxes work between the United States and other countries. Um, I'm honestly not sure. What we do is we issue royalty checks for the amount in the contract, and authors are responsible for paying taxes on their own. We pay taxes on our income every year, but we are not responsible for handling taxes for the authors. That's their job, because it would be far too complicated for us to be able to know tax codes for authors in various countries or various states that we work with. It would be labyrinthine and difficult, so we just leave that to our authors to pay taxes on, assuming they make enough money to pay taxes on it at all. But that would be up to you to figure out with an accountant if need be. But it's not, you know your local tax codes better than we do for sure. So looking at this, an author that is doing this by themselves, using these same numbers, that's selling their book for about $15, with the same overheads, would have to sell about 466 books before making a profit at all. And that doesn't include marketing, that doesn't include a number of things, and that's a very low production cost. That's based on what it costs us to produce a book with our current setup. So looking at these numbers, you have to sell a lot of books to break even if you're going to be able to keep the price low enough. And this is a print book, so ebooks are a little different, but if you're going to be able to keep the price low enough to be affordable to people, you have to sell a lot of copies. And as you can see, publishers have to sell more copies to break even than indie authors do, because we're paying you guys out a royalty. So either way, it's not too far off. It's about 100 copies, give or take, difference between us in order for us to break even, so to say nothing about earning a profit. So that is a serious consideration, because, as I said, book publishing isn't cheap. So in light of that, how much does it cost to publish a book? Doing it right requires a lot of different things that many authors don't think about when they're getting ready to self-publish. So it means that you have to take into account a lot of the things that a book publishing company, a traditional publisher, would pay for. So your ISBN, which is the unique code that belongs to your book, so that when they scan the barcode, the proper information comes up. If you are publishing through CreateSpace, they do issue ISBNs for free, but CreateSpace does have some drawbacks. I might discuss those a little bit later. CreateSpace is good, but it doesn't have some of the reach that other printing services like Ingram does. Founder is saying that he expects a lot of readers underestimate how expensive it is to be a publisher, and would it be safe to say that publishers cannot offer higher rates than we are showing? It would be a red flag. Well, if they're offering higher rates for ebooks, royalty rates for ebooks are usually around 50%. So we'll start there. If you're talking ebooks, a higher royalty rate is not a big deal. If you're talking print, I have heard of royalty rates from legitimate publishers up to about 20%, but too much higher than that, either the publisher is going to have to price the books so outrageously nobody's going to buy them, or they're skimping on book production. As we're going to see as we go through here, book production isn't cheap, so it might be a red flag, but I can't say patently it is. You just want to keep an eye on it and do some deeper investigating if you see really ridiculous royalty rates. But back to the costs here. So you have the ISBN, you have your book cover design, which can cost anywhere from a couple $100 to over $1,000 for really high-end designers. The cost of typesetting, which means you are taking the content of the book and making it look like a book. It means you're adding the front matter and making sure the margins are correct and the author's notes and everything else. A lot of people think that they can do typesetting in Word, and every time I hear somebody saying that they do typesetting in Word and sell it that way, it makes me twitch a little bit. And it's very disturbing, because Word simply does not have the diversity of function that a proper typesetting program does. So if you're planning on typesetting your own book, please invest in Microsoft Publisher or Adobe InDesign. I know there's probably other software out there that does it, but please invest in proper software. But paying a typesetter is not something that you can just, it does cost money, and it can cost between $45 an hour up from there. Then you have the cost of editing, which averages out, depending on the book, between 1,000 to 1,400, maybe sometimes a little bit more, depending. So there's a cost right there. Then you of course have marketing and marketing materials, things like bookmarks or postcards or taking out ads on Facebook or all these other things. You're going to be spending some money on that stuff. As Founder is asked if publishers are open to the idea of writers handling things themselves, like doing their own book cover or typesetting. Absolutely not. Because unless I happen to know that that author is I have a friend of mine who's a graphic designer. She's actually done covers for Insomnia, so if she were to publish a book with us, I would let her do her own cover. But unless this person is an expert, no publisher would be really open to the idea of them doing that work themselves, because you might have to end up redoing it for them, and if you don't have your people doing it, you can't guarantee it's done the way you need it done, then it'll be done properly. Typesetting is actually a really sticky, nitpicky sort of thing, and a lot of people don't understand the importance of typography or font or leading or kerning or widows or orphans, and if all of those words don't sound like English to you, you probably shouldn't be typesetting. So most publishers aren't going to be okay with an author doing their own thing. Now, if they want to pay somebody to design a cover for them, it's possible. I know we had an author. It was for a time of need. We were fighting with a particular image that we were trying to get, and we couldn't manage it in-house. So the author commissioned a painting done by a friend of his that was phenomenal and really fit the feel of the book, and we ended up using it. So you might be able to find a publisher who's willing to do something like that, but those are likely to be indie publishers, and I would just be careful before going ahead and doing something like that. Talk to your publisher first, because you might end up wasting money. So when you take into full account all of these things that I just was talking about, it can be upwards of $5,000 or $10,000 in costs of publishing your book and making sure it's ready to go. That number I didn't just pluck it out of the air. It came from Dan Pointer's Self-Publishing Manual, a book that I cannot speak highly enough about. I've used it for many years. It's a really great resource, and you can definitely pick up a copy, and I think everybody who's planning on publishing their book ought to pick up a copy, regardless of whether you're going to do it self-publishing or traditional publishing. It gives you a really good insight into how everything works. So it's an extremely valuable asset, but he says $10,000. I think it sometimes costs us about $5,000, but it's still a really important thing. So that number isn't coming from nowhere. The number is used to project the amount of copies you'd have to sell in order to break even was 2,500. It didn't include the marketing and publicity, and a lot of these things we can whittle our costs down to about 2,500 because of the way we do cover design and things that we do in-house. So rather than paying an external designer, we can cut our costs down substantially. That does mean at the moment, you know, some of us aren't necessarily taking a paycheck for some of the things we do, which is frustrating, but that's the nature of a startup. But as you can see, if it's going to take 600 plus copies just to make profit after spending 2,500, you can imagine how much we're going to have to spend, or how many copies you'd have to sell to make up for $5,000 or $10,000 investment in your book. And again, that's not talking about marketing either. So that's things like galley copies and review copies that you're going to send out. So when you're looking at the pricing here, it means that that discussion we had earlier about who absorbs the overhead for publishing your book, that is a much bigger point than a lot of people think it is. Everyone gets hung up on the creative aspects of it and doesn't really discuss the costs of publishing a book half the time. So when you make that decision, you really need to think, do I have $2,500, $5,000, $10,000 that I can invest into this venture or not? Because if you don't have that money to invest in it, it's probably not going to get done right, and it's going to show, and it's going to hurt you. A founder's asking, if he were to send a book cover he designs to the publisher, do you think they would consider it or maybe use it as a guide? When all else fails, you can ask your publisher, hey, I have this idea and concept, and I threw together this concept art. Here's what I'm thinking. I know that indie authors or indie publishers will oftentimes accept that kind of discussion and dialogue. I know that Insomnia, when we start talking cover design, I'm the resident cover designer, and I work very closely with our authors, trying to make sure that if it's possible and if it makes any kind of sense, that I produce a cover that is as close to what they see in their head as possible, or at the very least represents their book really well and excites them. So if you have a cover idea in your head that you want to send along, or if you're a graphic designer and you've done some art for it and you're like, hey, what about this? Don't be afraid to ask, but just recognize the answer may be no. So you've gone through all of that. Let's start talking about making that decision. So we've talked about the budget. We've talked about who does what in reference to the decision making and who has access to what. So let's start looking at this. Have you looked at your budget and seen if you have the money to publish your own book if you're looking at self-publishing? Do you have the money? And I know that's kind of a difficult thing because most writers are not writers full-time. Most of us have day jobs. Most of us are writing because we want to be able to lean on our writing later, but we might not have the money to invest all of that right now. And that's a stark reality for a lot of us. So, do you have the money to do it? Have you looked at multiple different avenues and examined the problem from all sides, including reading multiple industry blogs and articles on the subject? I encourage you guys to go out and read everything you can get your hands on before trying to make this decision. Go out and read bloggers whose opinions are completely contrary to mine. Go out and read publishing blogs who agree with me. Go out and read Publishers Weekly. You could read everything and build your own opinions on what works best for you. Research the heck out of it, because when you're looking at publishing your book, it is not a small decision. You're making a really important choice here. And some authors don't feel as that it matters as much in some ways, but it really does. So you're making a big life decision here. It's kind of like deciding where you're going to go to college. Sure, you might end up with a bachelor's degree in history, but where you get it from is going to determine a lot about your experience. So, and when you look at the cost, in some ways, you are kind of making an equivalent decision. This is a business choice. It's not something you want to just rush into and do willy-nilly. Have you read books about the publishing process? Do you know what's necessary in this process? Do you understand it? You don't have to know everything your publisher knows, but it's a really helpful and important thing to be able to know what's going to happen. And it also helps the dialogue with the publisher, because if I'm working with an author who has an idea of what goes into publishing a book, then they're oftentimes a little bit more easy to communicate with, because I can say, okay, so here's what's happening, here's why, here's what's going on, here's the next step, and I don't have to explain everything to them. They can understand, okay, so we've gone through a couple rounds of editing, we're getting ready to go into cover design, We can talk about what's viable, what's not, how this is going to work, and it becomes it smooths the narrative a little bit, and it can also help alleviate some of your fears about going into publishing, because if you're working with a publisher, you know, give or take, the um, the game that they're playing, the things that they're getting into. So if you're trying to do this and really make a run at it, and you're trying to do this as a part of your life, research the heck out of it, kind of, you know, in line with my last my last point. Jason is saying, another thing is publishers keep up to date with what sells. Any publisher worth their salt has a keen eye for cover designs that catch potential readers' eyes. So having an interesting cover idea doesn't necessarily mean it's what the industry needs, and doesn't necessarily mean it meets standards, and that's absolutely true. The same also goes with editing and so on. Sometimes things need to be changed because of this is what's going on in the market right now. Sometimes things need to be changed just because we know that that particular decision or that particular thing is going to hurt sales in a book. It would be disastrous on occasion. So being aware of that, it's a really important decision to make, and so don't just jump into this. If you are looking at self-publishing, so continuing back the previous discussion, do you know where you're going to recruit your team? Do you know where to find editors and typesetters and book designers and cover art designers, and do you know how to market your book? These are important things. So if you're looking into self-publishing, before you even take the first steps, you want to start finding places you can recruit these from. Now, I mentioned the EFA, so that's the Editorial Freelancers Association. It's a really big network of editors of all flavors. There are a lot of people involved in that. Not every good editor is part of the EFA. I know I'm not, but there are a lot of fantastic editors that are. It doesn't necessarily mean there aren't people in there who won't take advantage of you, but people who have membership in these professional organizations tend to be professionals, because fly-by-night shysters tend not to bother with credentials. If you're looking at cover art, I recommend checking out DeviantArt. There are a lot of phenomenally talented artists on there. You will have to spend money in order to get a professional artist to design your book cover for you. It's not something that's going to come cheap or free. And if you try and do it for exposure, oh, your art's going to get all kinds of exposure on the cover of my book, please just get rid of that. If you use the word exposure anywhere in your discussion, I will personally come to the screen and slap you. Artists can't eat exposure. They can't spend exposure to pay for their electricity bill. They have to spend money. So don't go thinking, oh, you can just do something and get somebody to do all this work for exposure. That is not okay. I will hurt you. Then have you decided what your goals are for your book? Are you just putting a book together because you want to do it? Or just because you're like, oh, wow, I've got this, like, you know, I have this family story I want to tell, and I just want to print a couple copies and send them out to my friends and my family, and nothing big. Then you don't need to spend a ridiculous amount of money on it. You can just put something together at Staples or put it on CreateSpace and you'll be fine. That's okay. You do not have to be shooting for your name in lights New York Times list of bestsellers, but make sure that you've decided what your goals are for your book and for your writing in general. Are you trying to do this as a career? Are you trying to be an author because you really want to make money at it, or are you just doing it because it's something you kind of want to do? It would be fun. It would be enjoyable. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is a completely valid thing. If you're just trying to be a hobbyist, do it. You don't need to spend 10 grand to be a hobbyist. But if you're trying to be a professional and really trying to get your book out there to as many people as possible, and trying to spend a great deal of time and energy and income on these things, then you want to just figure out what it is you're doing and make that decision and evaluate it. That's an important thing. And finally, do you have people you can ask these questions to? Do you have people you know that can tell you about the publishing process or verify information you receive? Do you have somebody who could look at a book contract and be like, this is ringing all kinds of bells, I'd be careful, or say, wow, this is a good idea? Do you have someone who you can bounce ideas off of? Well, I can tell you if you're watching this stream, you do. Feel free to reach out to me in any way you're able to if you have questions. Even if you're not publishing with Insomnia, if you want me to take a gander at your contract and tell you if it raises alarm bells for me, I am happy to do that. I am not a lawyer. I can't give you legal advice, but I know enough about the industry to be able to tell you run screaming in the opposite direction from these particular things, or this seems like it might be okay. It can work. So these are definitely things you want to look for, and there are a lot of people out there you can ask questions, and there are a lot of writing groups that you can find on Facebook. Um, Caveat emptor a little bit, because everybody likes to insert their opinions as fact a lot of the time, so be careful, but there are a lot of ways you can get this information, and a lot of ways you can find people to ask questions of. So make sure that you do have somebody, or at least a few people, you can talk to about this who know your language and understand what you're talking about. Founders asking, is it likely that a decent writer can make a living from their craft in any way possible, whether they're self-publishing or using a publisher? I know a couple of pretty darn decent writers. I'm friends with a few of them who have done self-publishing, and they make enough to cover their rent every month. And it's not necessarily a living, but it is a decent amount of money. And it's something that they love doing and are really passionate about, and so they make enough profit that every month they cover their rent, which is great. So it's all about how much work and effort and time and knowledge you have going into this, and sometimes it's also about whether or not lightning's going to strike, because there is an element of luck in all of this. Getting noticed by people can just be about luck on occasion. So, but it's definitely possible. It isn't a pipe dream, and if you know what you're doing, and if you're paying attention, and if you study marketing and learn how to do all of this properly, there's a good chance you can at least cover your rent every month. There's a good chance that you can bring in some side income. Whether or not you're going to be the next Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, really big author, that's the luck aspect. If you're going for the top of the Christmas tree, whether or not you're gonna get there, that's luck. But if you're a really good author who has good craft, there's a really good chance you can make a run at it and at least get your book out there. So it's possible. So here I have a list of recommended reading for authors who are looking to get into publishing as well, whether they are looking to self-publish, whether they're looking to traditionally publish. This list of resources are some books that I think are really important. So let's start with Dan Poynter's Self-Publishing Manual, Volumes 1 and 2. Volume 1 is mostly about the production process of your book. You can get older, slightly outdated copies on Amazon for not a lot of money. And Volume 2 you can get in ebook format, which is largely about marketing on social media. Volume 1 has a lot of marketing discussions, but it's largely about traditional marketing and how to find there are a lot of traditional book reviewers and stuff listed in here, so it's a really good snapshot of how to do this. And even if you're planning on traditionally publishing your book, it'll give you a lot of wonderful information that you will be able to use all the way through the publishing process. I can't recommend it highly enough. Secondly is Rise of the Machines, Human Authors in a Digital World, written by Kristen Lamb. It is a book about social media marketing. Again, it doesn't matter whether you're self-publishing or traditionally publishing. It is a really good book that gives a lot of really wonderful ideas about marketing. I'm glad you're enjoying it, Penner. That's wonderful. I've encouraged a lot of people to purchase this book. You can get it on Amazon in ebook format for not a lot of money. You can purchase it physically. You can get it any way you can. It's a great book. The next two books are about craft. I think all writers should read On Writing by Stephen King. Personally, I will admit to skipping the entire autobiographical element of that book because I am not a Stephen King fan myself. I respect his writing, I respect him as a writer. He is a phenomenal master of the craft, but I just don't like horror. It's not my genre. And some of the other things he's written, he's just not my particular favorite writer. But that doesn't mean that what he says isn't 100% valid. It is a really good book, and I recommend everybody read it. Um, it's on the slide here. It is called On Writing by Stephen King. It is the third bullet down here. The next one is called Sin and Syntax. It is written by Constance Hale. It is another writing craft book. It is a lot of fun. It makes you smile, it makes you laugh, it keeps your attention. I strongly recommend it. It's a really enjoyable read. So it's one of the best books about writing that I've ever picked up, and I have read it cover to cover multiple times just because it's enjoyable. So it'll help some of the crafty things, it'll help explain some stuff. It'll go over a lot of the things the next live stream is about next week, where I'll be talking about adverbs and adjectives and passive voice and all these other wonderful things. It talks about all of that in there, and it's really well written. And she manages to do it without being dry, so there's that. Then you have Publishers Weekly. It is an industry magazine, and it has numerous articles about publishing and trends and marketing and all kinds of other things. Even if you don't get a subscription to it, check out their website. They have a lot of really useful and valuable articles. It's a really good resource for writers. And Writer's Digest, which is another industry magazine, again, full of articles, all kinds of useful and important information. I recommend you check it out. But this list of books right here, it is by no means exhaustive, but these are the books on my shelf that I keep going back to, or periodicals that I keep going back to again and again and again, and reading and rereading, because the content helps me get my head around everything I need to do. My copy of Dan Poynter's publishing manual is full of highlighter and sticky notes and notes in the margins. It is a complete mess. It is dog-eared. I think I spilled tea or coffee on it at one point, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I have used this book to death, and I can almost guarantee that you will too if you're going to be going into the publishing arena and doing it seriously. It is, and I have the copy I have I purchased from a library. But this snapshot right here, these are some of the most influential books on everything I've done in publishing. And I've been in publishing about 7 years, and I don't normally add a lot of books to this list, so I can recommend some others about writing, but these are really the core of what I think most authors looking at publishing should know. That's the end of everything I had planned, so I apparently did not plan for a full hour. I'm 10 minutes short. I'm still getting used to using the PowerPoint slides, so I'm still trying to figure out how long each slide is going to take me, so forgive me for that. If you would like a copy of these PowerPoint slides, please check out my Patreon. I am at the $15 a month subscription level. You receive a free critique from me every month of a certain number of pages. You receive copies of all of these slides. You receive access to me via the chat service Discord to ask me questions anytime you want, as well as receiving a monthly short story. There are a couple levels of support that you can do via Patreon. I will be putting the link in the description when I upload this video to YouTube and to Facebook. But please consider that if you found this slide helpful. It will help me to produce better quality content. It'll give me access to better quality recording software and help me develop my studio a little bit. I'm sorry to toss this in here at the end, but the financial support is important so that I can keep doing this, and it's really important to me to have these conversations with you guys every week. I really enjoy spending this time with you, taking questions, talking about the world of writing. My cat is snoring in the background. I'd say I'm sorry, but I'm really not. I'm always happy to hear from you guys during the week and have conversations with you about publishing and writing. And please feel free to pitch ideas for me for these streams, because sometimes I feel like I've covered everything and I'm absolutely certain I haven't. So I think we can leave it here. I'm not going to subject you to my cat's noises for too much longer. um, oh dear. So I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. I'm really glad to have you. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me during the week, and have a wonderful evening. Since you are already awake at 10 p.m., I hope you guys go write something or prepare for NaNoWriMo. I know that that's going to be my next stop, is preparing for the rush of Nano. I hope you guys have a great night, and I will talk to you later. Take care.